For those of you that don't know me, I'm Andre Jokowski, and today we're doing the workshop on stepping up to multifamily. In the past, we've done a lot of duplex, triplex flipping workshops. Today's going to be a bit different. We're doing a little bit more large scale, and I thought this would be appropriate because it's sort of like the natural evolution of how people tend to progress with real estate investing. And we have a few professionals here that I'm going to introduce you to. So first we have Will Burgess. He's an investor, and he'll tell you a little bit more about himself, but he's someone who has invested in multifamily, and he'll share with us his experience and some of the lessons he's learned, and share some actually really valuable information that will benefit you guys, and with some tips. And then we have Arturo, who is the real estate lawyer, and then we have Steven, who is the mortgage broker. So we are here. We do encourage interaction, so if you have questions, please feel free to ask. This is educational and informative, so we'd like to get engaged. Ask anything you like, especially if it's legal related. So first we'll start off with Will. Come on.
All right.
Will.
Thanks.
All right.
It's good size here. So my name is Will. I'm a real estate investor, and I guess to start off, you pretty much have the dream team here. Like this, you've got the $25 just to get a sandwich and everything is probably the best money you've ever spent, because I've gone through a ton of mortgage brokers, a ton of realtors and all that to build this team. So you've got more than a decade's worth of experience, and these guys are the ones that make it happen. So, I got to thank them just for coming and for everything. So yeah, definitely talk to these guys, direct any questions, legal, financial, any of that way. As for myself, so I think let's get going here. Yeah. They'll talk a little bit more about themselves and their roles. Like I said, I'm a real estate investor, but I also have some varying backgrounds. I'm a little bit all over the map, although I don't really like the term. I guess entrepreneur is probably one of the ones that fits the best. So I've done, how do I say this? Air traffic controller at Pearson and Toronto for, last 10 years or so. Also, I started a company, manufacturing company about 20 years ago, still in business today. Some of you may know some of the people who I guess I've spawned from that. Manufacturing's done CDs and vinyl and all that. Maybe you guys have heard of Drake. There's also Nelly Furtado, so they got their start with my company. Tragically, Hip and Rush, we just signed them about a year and a half ago, so some pretty notable names there. So that's still in business. So I have a good idea of the entrepreneurial aspect and the business aspect, and then I've gotten to real estate investing. I've done everything from the single family home to the duplex, gutting it, and then I've stepped up to multifamily, and Andre and I felt that there would be a lot of benefit just in terms of being here and trying to give you whatever I've learned. So that's just so RealBond is actually a corporation. We're just getting out there a little bit more. It's focused on multifamily and that sort of thing. So it's a small family-run firm where basically we're just going to be helping people get invested or taking that step or educating them into multifamily. So any kind of questions, you can check that out if you want. So realbond.ca. So what we'll be talking about today, why multifamily versus other asset classes. That'll be a quick one. Some of the pros and cons, some of the differences, some nice before and afters there. Big one here, we're going to get bogged down a little bit in the numbers, so I'll try and make it as fun as I can, but we're going to have understanding cap rates and the case study and going through the numbers there. So it's a big thing within multifamily is just understanding how the numbers work. So some of the strategies we've used: increase revenue, reduce expenses, property management. We don't have a property manager here. The guy I'd love to have here is actually based out in London, so it wasn't very practical. But the good thing is I can give you kind of the inside track about what to look for and things like that without potentially offending any property managers. Identifying the right property, examples, then we're going to be passing things off to Arturo and Steven to talk a little bit more about those things. So why multifamily? Monopoly, natural progression. Most of us, if not all of us, have played it as a kid, start off, You buy the little greenhouses, you move up to the red hotels, all that. It just kind of makes sense. So this is just real life monopoly. This is what we're doing. So, okay, caveat here. Like Andre and I talked about this, and we have to have full disclosure. You're not going to retire next Tuesday. I'm sorry. I can't help you there. Some people are coming to this game saying, like, I want to just hit a home run. And that's great, and you might, but the reality is, I've never seen it done. So just curb your expectations a little bit. I'm sure you guys have heard this before. Real estate is a marathon, not a sprint. So just keep that in the back of your mind. You're putting your money in. Expect kind of 5 years plus to be involved in a project or whatever it is. It's not buying, selling stocks, trading things quick. That's not what we're doing here. But you'll see the returns. You know, Warren Buffett, we're making his returns. So I wanted to clarify here the 3 pillars of real estate. So what I focus on mostly are these 3 things. This is where we make the money. So the simplified version, cash flow at the end of the month. How much money do you have left over? Simple. Mortgage pay down, even better. How much is left over? Appreciation, so there's 2 types. We've got forced appreciation, which I believe in, but then we've got the market appreciation, which I don't. I never factor in market appreciation because then you're trying to time the market, and I don't recommend that. So multifamily versus other asset classes. Well, we're all here to talk about multifamily, so I'm going to take a safe bet here that that's the way you guys want to go. Just know there's other things that exist: retail, industrial, agricultural. They all have great things about them, but you know they've got their own independent learning. So we're just going to be focused on multifamily. And just a quick show of hands, so I have an understanding. How many people here have investment properties? So, okay, it's about 50%. So perfect. So passive income. These are some of the pros. We all pretty much know what that's about. And have you guys read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and all of that? Yeah, that's such a great book in terms of framing things and understanding the mentality of investing in business and passive income. So that is key. I think real estate is probably one of the best, if not the best way of achieving that. The multifamily properties you're going to gain from economies of scale. We'll talk more about that, but simply put, you're talking about, now we've got, instead of one person under one roof, you now have 12 people under one roof with one furnace or boiler, or just one big ticket item to take care of. So a lot less headaches. Obviously, it allows for more growth. It's going to be professionally managed. That's a huge part in terms of the passive income. Purpose built, so that helps with the commercial financing and things like that. So the property price is dictated by income. This is a really cool one. We're not talking about emotional buyers and people driving up the price unnecessarily. When you get into apartment buildings and this kind of thing, you're going to be looking at a different type of buyer. And later on, we're actually going to talk about how we made $150K basically just by giving people free internet. So it's kind of a cool example, and hopefully it gets the gears turning and understanding how some of the numbers work. So we're going to be, reduce vacancy exposure through multiple rents. So you're not going 100% vacant when one person leaves. You now can average things out. And actually, when you put that 5% vacancy rate, it's a true vacancy rate because you can calculate the average. Cons. Obviously, it's more expensive. We can talk a bit more about that later, but we're going to be partnering people together in most cases to acquire the building. It's not as liquid, so if you need to put it on the market or you're stuck or something, don't expect to sell it as quick as you would a single family home. More rules for operating. So this is a kind of a tricky one a lot of people don't know. If you go into MLS and let's say I'm searching for multifamily, well, you may notice that in certain pockets, a lot of stuff is coming up. So out in Waterloo, there'll be 50 some odd listings, but not very many in other places. Well, the reason is different regions have different rules. So if you were to invest in multifamily in Waterloo, you now have to do an annual HVAC and an annual electrical inspection and these kind of things. I haven't stayed up to date, so I don't know exactly where they're at with that, but I know you're now taking a chunk out of the bottom line just by paying these extra fees required by the city. Some more requirements for financing. Stephen will be talking more about that stuff, and more liabilities. So if you're not careful in terms of how you structure things, you're potentially worried about that. So now we can get into some of the good stuff. This is a property that we bought recently. It's a 13-plex. So some before and after stuff. So you can see there's a lot of things that have changed, and pretty simply, like we talked about curb appeal and stuff like that, you put in an awning for a couple $1,000, you change the windows, and it really changes the look. So that's one thing that'll help with the tenant's expectations. You have a building that looks like this, you're going to be getting a certain type of person walking to the door and expecting to pay a certain type of rent versus this. So some of the common areas. This is one of the things I love. You're now looking at limited space common areas, generally simple to do, but you address the front, the curb appeal, and the common areas, and like I said, you've changed the expectation for the building. We still don't know what the apartments look like inside. They could be crap. But the thing is, people have already got their years working saying, I'm going to be paying this much. So here's what we ended up doing with the property. So we've got some before and after. So on this side, you can see the kitchen here, and it's walled in. Pretty classic style for apartments. Below it, the wall, open it up, and we just increased rent by 50%. That comes with an understanding of the market and saying, here's the top end, here's where it's at now, what can we do to bring it there?
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing I do want to mention, it's really important to understand the market that you're investing in, because whether you're investing in London, Orillia, Toronto, Windsor, or Waterloo, if you are doing what this renovated unit looks like, I've been in markets where it doesn't matter if you add in granite countertops or quartz countertops and open it up, you're still going to be paying $800 for a one-bedroom apartment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're going to be wasting a whole lot of money for no apparent reason. So really understand what you will be designing or what you're going to be renovating will actually provide you with the increased rents. So that's something to really understand your market that you're investing in, how important it really is.
Yeah, that's huge. You need to understand the top end. You need to understand where you're fitting in the market. Are you going for the top end? Are you happy in the middle? Where is there the most meat for you as an investor? So another tip, I don't know if you guys watched Income Property and stuff like that, but it's a pretty good tip. You stage the apartment, you're going to get some slightly better rents. What else is really good about this is once you stage an apartment, then you take some pictures, you have those pictures now. So anytime you have to market the property in the future, you put the pretty ones on. So yeah, this is before you put the appliances in and everything like that. Bathrooms, pretty cheap. You don't have to go crazy with them. Big thing is the tiles. If the tiles are decent, then it's actually a pretty cheap fix, because we're talking about the vanity, maybe not the toilet. Just clean it up with a mirror and some lights, a little bit of paint, and you're looking pretty good there. So once you get into the tiles, it adds to the bottom line, but yeah, it's a decent way to inexpensively increase some rents. Bedrooms, they're so simple, 4 walls, a little bit of paint, whatever the flooring is. Occasionally we do some kind of curtains or some kind of window coverings. Just depends on the market we're going for. We'd be more on the high end for that sort of thing if we're providing window coverings. So here's a breakdown of the renovation costs, 13 units. So if this will give you an idea of the actual costs associated. So taking the building from kind of crap to dumping $640,000, and we're looking pretty good now. So an average price of $49,000 per unit to bring it up. So we've been able to increase the market rent by 50% by investing that money. But yeah, just to highlight quick, you've got the awning for like $2,000, and then we've got basically like some laminate and the floor, I guess the carpet for the hallways, and just within those elements. So I'd have to look through.
That's the fifth one down.
Fifth one down, so laminate, yeah. So 21 there, around $30,000. We did a lot in terms of changing the actual look and feel of the place in the common areas. So
you got 85 for labor. What was all that?
It's a mix. So I had to kind of throw this together. So yeah, it's kind of a big bag, so I just rounded up. But you'll see some of those individual items would be people, like you'd have black labor specific to tiling and other things, but that's just a general, we don't know where it went, so we kind of just threw it in there just so the bottom number is accurate. Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
I was going to say, was there any concerns with the structural integrity of the building when you first bought it, or?
No, but we had some snags after the fact.
Yeah.
So after we owned the building, yeah, we found out there was some kind of foundation problem, a foundation leak. And I was a bit surprised actually because I was like, oh god, this is gonna be a big ticket item. And it was actually our property manager that found it, addressed it, and he's like, Will, got some bad news, man. They've got a leak on the corner of the building. We're gonna have to dig it up. We're gonna have to redo the foundation here. I'm like, all right, what's bad news? $2,700. He's like,
What?
yeah, man, that sucks. Just sure, that's the best you can do. I'm like, I'm used to like Toronto prices. We were expecting like 30, 40,000 or something. So I don't know how he did it so cheaply, but this is a property, man. Yeah. What's up?
It sounds like this was in London.
Yes.
And so, how did you decide which market to go after? I mean, you guys touched on it. You got to understand where
Yes.
where you're getting the biggest bang for your buck. And maybe you cover it later.
Yep, I'm going through it later. I've got a little section where it's like identifying the markets, but I'm personally invested. I'm in Barrie, London, and Toronto. So I bounce around a little bit. I'm not too afraid of going outside, but whenever I go into a particular area, I have to have a firm understanding of what it is that I'm getting into. So, like if you're asking specific questions about London or Barrie, I can answer them. If I'm seeing a lot of attractive deals in a particular area, I'm going to spend a lot of time doing my market research. So I'll go through that a little bit later.
How long did it take you to do those renovations? Over what period?
2 years. So this was a complicated scenario. So I don't know if I want to get into how that was, but long and the short of it is we were able to pair up with a builder, and he was able to kind of take care of all of that, and we agreed on a purchase price when everything was completed. So we didn't go in full bore with all the money. We were able to kind of arrange everything, say, hey, if you do this work and get us to this point, we'll pay you this much. So.
Did you do like a rolling renovation, like across different units?
No, we paid the tenants to get it. And that's where we needed the builder. We needed someone with a little bit deeper pockets just to get these guys out. It's like, hey, we'll give you 3 months worth of rent to leave. And so that way we could go in and take advantage of their team, because he had a lot of this labor involved and things like that, where he just do his thing, right? Goes through and all the units at the same time. So. All right, so this could be fun, this could be boring. Do you guys understand cap rates? Or yes, no, some? Okay. Long and short of it, yeah, here's the actual definition, the ratio. If you buy a building for $1 million and it makes you 50 grand at the end of the year, you have a 5% cap rate. It's simply like, if I pay cash, what percentage am I getting back? So that's how to calculate the NOI, gross income minus expenses. Just don't include the mortgage. That's one that tends to get people a bit. So you need that NOI to calculate the cap rate, or a couple of pieces in order to get the purchase price. So yeah, $1 million, there's the rent, 100,000 after your expenses. So you got 70,000. There's your cap rate. 70,000, which is the money left over after the expenses divided by the purchase price, 7%. So everyone good on this? So, okay. Don't feel bad if you have questions, because I know in the past some people didn't quite get it, but this is going to be important as we go forward. So why do we care about it? Because commercial real estate is generally dictated by the cap rate. So in a lot of these areas, you'll get a general cap rate, and from that, if we know the NOI, which you're reaching out to people and saying, hey, how does this building perform? Give me the actual NOI. Now, take that at face value, because everyone lies, that everyone misses things. I'll see an NOI and be like, there's no property management fee. Well, I'll have to take that into consideration, add that on to get to my own NOI. So just be a little bit weary about what the other parties are providing you, because they're going to want to make this property look as good as it can. So if we take a look back at the building here, 248 Warncliffe. So I've just rounded up a little bit for some of these numbers. Purchase price $2 million, down payment $400. Some of the closing costs, legal was.
They weren't that high.
Yeah.
No, they weren't.
They were not that high.
No, you double It's definitely lower. This particular one, he got screwed, because the other guy did not do his job. So you actually did double duty.
I worked hard.
I remember that. So that's outside the norm. That's because we were having problems on the other end, and he had to do basically the work of two parties. So the broker fees, lender fees, all that, you can touch on that stuff, right? Okay, yeah. So a little bit different than your standard residential, where that stuff generally gets absorbed and you're not seeing it. Now we're actually going to be paying that. So it's on a different side of the table. So the capital required to get in, that's just the purchase of the building. So now we're looking at the income. So $1,200 a unit, 72. We've got another 6 one-bedroom at about $1,000 a piece. The bachelor, extra income, laundry, this varies. Sometimes it's 150, sometimes 300, so just an average. So this is the total income for the property, 170 grand a year.
That's after renovation.
Yes, this is the post-renovation. So if we're talking the numbers for the pre-renovation, I think it was 680 plus another 650. So the builder had to float the property for 2 years, and he was around 1.3, 1.4 in, but we agreed to pay him 1.9 because it's his headache, not ours. We just get the end product. So, and that's where we're at from day one. So property management is one of the big ones, but highly, highly worth it. I don't recommend trying to manage this type of property yourself. Like I love it because literally I'll wake up, got an email, someone got locked out last night, and it's fixed. And I just pick up my phone a couple of times and that's it. Nothing to it. Property tax, we're expecting this to go up over time, so that's going to reduce things, but you know, just be aware of that. When you buy a property, you're going to trigger some kind of tax increase. Heating, hydro. Funny thing is heating this 13-unit building is probably on par or just a touch over heating my single-family home. So this is where the economies of scale kicks in. We have 2 big boilers, and we're not paying that much for heating. So hydro, common areas, a lot of this, you know, pretty self-explanatory. Internet, we'll talk a bit more about that one. Cleaning, we've got to have someone come in, take care of the common areas, laundry room, that sort of thing. Fire systems, make sure that we went through that a bit. So we had the fire inspector come through and give us some headaches, but it's all fixed. But now on a monthly basis, we're having people come by, check things, sign off. So that's an expense you have to consider.
Monthly?
Yeah, monthly now. So. Yeah, vacancy, bin rental, so extra garbage space. The bins weren't working, so we had to give them one of those big bins and landscaping and snow. So it's next to nothing because the design was intentional. So in the summer we have virtually no cost in terms of landscaping. So that's mostly just snow and salting the driveways. That's our expense at the end. Annual income minus the expenses. There's our NOI. So now we look at the cap rate. Where do we find it? Google. That's it. There's no secret formula to that one. Just take a look. Well, maybe Stephen, you might know, but even better. But I just Googled it. So yeah, what was it? CBRE or whatever. I found this, and they usually have a lot of reports for the major metropolitan areas in Canada, and they send out quarterly reports. So we're a low-rise A class, considering the style of the building. So we're at 5%.
So there's other ways of finding cap rates. One is the CBRE, their research. Others is just you know, knowing the market and knowing what cap rates are. You can actually see what other buildings that have sold, what their NOI was, and then what their purchase price was or sold price, and then you can figure out the cap rate from there. So you can do your own research, but this is one way as well to figure it out.
I would probably add that as you do the market research and you do like the industry research and then the actual market research, compare what you're purchasing at compared to what the industry is saying and the market's doing.
Yeah. You definitely want to look, well, just see what's actually out there, because those numbers can definitely be off, and you want to get a feel. You don't want to necessarily jump in on, you know, week 2 of searching an area. You want to start to get a feel of what things are selling at and where they are in the real world. So, our valuation now, with everything that we did to the property, and there's some other things we did in the background that we didn't really talk about so much. Legalization of a 13th unit, that was one of them after the fact, as well as the internet and some other odds and ends in reducing expenses. So we've increased the property value now. The actual purchase price is 1.9, so it's up at 2.3. So, you know, the question is, we got a good deal, 2 million. Like I said, the actual is 1.9, but just to make the numbers easier. So 300 grand in, yeah, a short period of time, not bad. So what we talked about, so this is I'm not saying go out and do internet. I'm just saying have an understanding of the bottom line and how you can add value to tenants and also add value to yourself and the property. So here's what we did to make $150,000. Internet cost us $150. And there's some more cool stuff about this. We actually need to put internet in the building, and I'll touch on that a bit later, but $150 a month, get highest speed we can through Rogers. And we had to put those, you know, those things at Starbucks they have in the ceiling that look like smoke detectors. We put those on the different floors, wired it all in. Now the whole building has a full range of Wi-Fi. We've been able to increase our rents a little bit above market because tenants looking at us are now saying, oh, I don't have to pay internet when I come here. Cool, that's one expense less. Just about everyone I know needs internet. So we're taking an average increase, 13 units, so 680, and subtracting that. So we're making an extra $630 a month. 7,500 annually. Now what that does, when we do this whole cap rate calculation, is we take that annual price, divide by the cap rate. That's how much we increase the actual value of the property on paper. So when we're doing any of our reports or any of this stuff, once we file the taxes, you're actually going to see that profit, and we've actually increased the value. So start thinking about ways to reduce expenses or add value to people, and that'll translate to the bottom line.
Is that a commercial plan for the internet, or just a
I think it's actually just a regular plan. Yeah.
That's enough
we haven't had
all the units, or
the big thing is we got the biggest plan. Yeah. I think originally we actually had 2 different plans, and we just dropped one. We didn't need it. Like, you asked for the fastest speed and everything, and once we got it all wired correctly, you're good. So some more strategies to increase the revenue and reduce the expenses. So strategic renovations, use a designer. This is actually very helpful when you're looking on a big scale. You don't want to be doing like hodgepodge mix. If you have somebody who knows what they're doing, they're saying, here's your color, here's this, it'll make a huge difference to how everything looks. Common areas we talked about, obviously painting, flooring, curb appeal. A lot of this stuff just goes hand in hand. Most of you are invested. This is what you would do to your rental property. So just think of that on a bigger scale. So that way you're looking at the kitchens, like, you know, we're now buying 12, 13 kitchens. So we got a deal. We're going to different suppliers. We're doing things different ways. Same thing with all the appliances, dishwashers. This is one to just keep in the back of your mind. We literally have property managers we work with. We say, hey, you put in a dishwasher, I'll get you an extra $50 a month. Cool. On-site laundry, again, beaches, we tend to put the laundry actually in the suites because people expect it. In apartment buildings, think about, do I want to have this extra income? It's nice too because it's cash, so you know that definitely helps as well. But think about where the benefit is. Are you going to get more rent, or does it make sense to have it in a common area? The free internet, the parking, so think about parking. Are you charging for parking or not? Individual hydrometers, we've got an example later, but this is one that's very helpful. If you're looking at a building and for some reason a lot of these older buildings, they got one hydrometer and they're servicing like 13, 15, 20 units, and scratching my head, I'm like, why are these tenants not paying their own hydro? So that's an easy way to, you know, flip things over to the other side. Talked about staging. Then you can think of other things like, you know, solar panels on the roof, big flat roofs. I don't know how appealing the government program is anymore. They dropped that pretty substantially. But cell transmitters, billboards, all that fun stuff. So decreasing expenses. Key fobs. We actually put in our building, so these little things like this, just put it up against the door. What that allows us to do is, with free internet and the computer there, we're able to just get the property manager to type things in, and he can reprogram the key. Someone's locked out, something happens, we need to get a trade into the building. They just go online and let the guy in. We don't have to have a $70 service call to have somebody go out. So we needed the internet in place to begin with to run this and reduce our expenses. So we've done it in both ways. The landscaping, we did all hardscape, so no lawn, and we talked about how that pretty much dropped the expenses. High efficiency boilers, so that was a big thing. I think we went from $9,000 a year down to around $3,500 a year. So there's a big drop there. LED light bulbs, I haven't really seen how much that benefits on the hydro bill, but I haven't looked that closely, but it's an idea. Scratch and dent appliances, I love this because you know you're getting a huge discount, and the stuff is going to get scratched and dent after the first tenant anyway. So it's a good place. Better management. We'll talk more about property management, but that's huge in terms of having less turnover, less problems. So here we go, on to property management. So we've got the ongoing operation of your project. I think property management is one of the most highly underrated things. Everyone focuses on the acquisition, what they can do, this, that, but what happens after year one? Property management, these are the guys running the building, taking care of it, ongoing. You gotta pick a good one, you have to understand what they're doing, because they're the ones that are gonna make the money in the long term for you. Think of these guys almost like managers of the mutual fund. You're giving them this investment, and these guys have to manage it. So make sure they know what they're doing and do your due diligence on them. They do all this stuff, collect the rents. I have not seen a rent check and I don't know how long. Straight in the bank account. We've got the rent increases. I go onto the portal and I look at it and it's like, huh, cool. It's gone up from $1,200 to $1,230. So I'll see the actual increases and they just take care of it automatically. They have the dates, they send out the notice, they increase it. So a lot of these things where sometimes you're not thinking of or on a larger scale, it'd be hard to deal with. All the evictions, all the headaches. Sometimes I find out about this after the fact. We had a guy with an Airbnb, didn't even know about it. And they ended up booting him and doing all this stuff, taking him to court, and all I saw was like, hey, why am I paying $400 to repaint a unit that we just did? And he's like, oh, we didn't tell you. And he gave me this whole long story for about 15 minutes about how they found this guy, they ended up evicting him, they did all this stuff, but I was completely oblivious, and that's by choice, because I said, you just do your thing. And the only reason I caught it is I'm like, huh, $400 more in painting, but he collected all the money, he got the guy evicted, he put in a new tenant, and the only thing I saw was a little dip on the spreadsheet. So they help a lot with that. Marketing, local knowledge, they know the area, they know what they're doing, they know the rents, they know the people, they have a database, which leads to reduced vacancy. So the maintenance, reduced expenses, these guys have got people on staff. You have a problem, you're not calling a plumber, an electrician, you're not paying top dollar. They've got a guy who shows up, takes care of it, and you're paying him by the hour. Maybe it's $50 instead of $110, whatever it is, but generally cheaper. They have the tips and tricks. So the door locks, what we talked about, the fobs, the actual doors are on Bluetooth too. So they can reprogram all of those on the fly. As soon as a tenant leaves, we don't have to worry about keys or any of that stuff. So he was the one that put me onto that, and he said, we do this in all our units. Simplified financial reporting. Said there's a dashboard. They just send me all the stuff. Yep.
A question regarding choosing property management.
Yeah.
How did you go about choosing a property manager?
Wait, anyway. So some of the things I look for, I like small to medium-sized companies. So the big institutional ones, unless you're playing in that big scale with 200-300 units plus, go with the little guys. You have personal relationship. They know the markets. They're very efficient. So I look for that first. I don't consider that a con. Like these guys, they're hungry and they understand what's going on. They're local experts. So the thing we want to find out though is, do they specialize in our type of property? So I'm not going to pick a guy who's dedicated to student housing for an apartment where I want people, young professionals or long-term rentals, that sort of thing. So just know the kind of market they're in. Make sure they have the on-staff maintenance, because that's a big one. Some of the smaller fly-by-night companies, they don't have enough properties to justify it, and that's going to end up hurting you, because you won't be able to get the service calls or things done quickly, and that's going to affect your turnover and the tenant experience. So how they handle the funds. So I don't particularly like commingled. I like dedicated accounts, but you want to find out, are they sending checks, direct deposits, what is it they're doing? Just because you want to make sure it's clean and they know how to do accounting properly. Otherwise, it could be a financial mess. So that's something, just prod them a little bit on some of the accounting questions. What's your experience, years in business? The obvious. How do they handle after-hours emergency calls? I like to know that there's someone there available up there around. And how do they handle the financial reporting? When am I going to get it? What kind of reports are they going to need? Am I going to be taken care of? So, yep, you'll be handing over your keys.
I just want to mention something. So, speaking of property managers and how I guess people underestimate the value in them, I literally have had several clients or investors who've purchased multifamily and have not gotten property managers because they want to save the money and do it themselves. And I'm not saying everyone experiences this, but there have been several, and a couple in particular over the last year who literally have gone through, how do you say it, like some really hardships because they're so stressed out and overwhelmed by dealing with tenants that they don't know how to handle. And I cannot say enough about the right property manager who understands the law. And I'm not saying that lawyers don't know this, but lawyers don't necessarily deal with tenant stuff. It's like paralegals and property managers who really deal with this every day. They understand, okay, if a tenant says something or really bugs you about just ongoing stuff, they'll be like, this is how you have to deal with them. You cannot just be passive. Okay, no problem, we'll fix that thing. And you always want to be pleasing. I know so many people who want to just please the tenants, and they always get taken advantage of. And then they're stressed out, they're like, I don't want to be a landlord. I just don't like doing this at all. And I'm like, guys, it'll cost you dollars just to get someone to take the stress off your plate. And they just want to save $200 a month and still deal with it. So
just to sort of back that up, it's one of the first things Will said, and it's that it's passive income.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, just to sort of piggyback off what they're talking about is, I've had situations where real estate owners will come to me and say, I can evict a tenant. Sure, there's a form, and there's a cost associated, and they don't like that cost. They think it's unreasonable, they think it's not warranted. I'm just evicting a tenant. Well, this is what the procedure is, and had you had somebody in place, they would have handled that paperwork for you. They most likely would have done it accurately and professionally. And the need for a legal professional to do that simple task wouldn't be needed. But just sort of going back to what they've said, it's passive income. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, remember, you don't want to be dealing with lawyers with respect to your property. You want to be dealing with nobody. Right? That's really what it's supposed to be passive. So the better the system is set up to run so that at the end of the day you realize your cap rate or NOI, whatever that the case may be, is what you should be, in my view at least, going for if you're looking to do a property that's a little bit more substantial. If you have one condo in Toronto and you say, yeah, that's one condo, I'm going to lease it out, then my kids are going to live in it. That's a different story. But property management is a very complicated and complicated field that there are professionals that manage it, and that's what they do on a day-to-day basis. So, and the story is, without beating it up too much, is really, really consider it on a larger scale property.
Yeah.
When you say do your homework there, what are some specific things that you would do to really check out?
Yeah, so I do the calling, I do the Google searches, I try and find out if there's other people who have been there or, whatever. I just try and do as much investigating as I can about that company and to try and have an idea of how they operate their business, to see if they really know what they're talking about. It's like, I'll throw out a bunch of questions. Hey, how do you evict a tenant? If he doesn't pay, like if it's the second day of the month and he hasn't paid, I'm going to have an N4 at his door. Okay, cool. Like it's just like there's no leniency, or they'll have quick answers, or they'll have their process. You want to know that they know what they're doing and they've got systems in place to handle it. That makes a big difference. So there's a lot of people. You get these one-off property management guys, and just be wary. Some of them are really good. I've got one up in Barrie, and he's phenomenal. He's just one guy, but he's amazing. And you grill him on anything, he knows the answer's cold. So, but generally speaking, the things I mentioned before are some of the things to look for: smaller companies and how they actually work, and search for reviews and do some digging that way.
And I like what Will said there is when you ask them questions, they have an answer instantaneously. They know what they need to say. And that's really important when you're dealing with tenants, is they don't want to, again, I'm not downplaying tenants or anything, but you need to know how to speak with them. You need to be assertive. You cannot let them step on you. As soon as they see that, there are professional tenants out there who will take advantage of you.
Yep.
And if it hasn't happened to you yet, it will happen. So you just need to be prepared, and you need to be armed and ready, because it will happen. Now I'd say 95% of the tenants out there are actually good.
Yeah.
There are the few percent that they're out there just because they want to take advantage of you.
What I really like is when they come to me and they've got that gut feeling. Not only do they have the quick answers, they're like, 2 guys, same rent, same scenario. I like this guy. Why? I don't know. They just, I've done this long enough. He's not going to give me problems. These guys, and I respect that. I actually look at that, like, even if they can't give me a reason, but they've given me, this is how I deal with the quick answers, but they've almost got that sixth sense at that point, because they've been in the business enough. So you want to get a feel in terms of how these guys operate.
And also, do they back up their tenant find service? So if they found you a tenant and they just went on a whim, like, I think that they're good, but then they decide to leave after 2 months, you're gonna have to pay your property manager again, half month or 1 month to find a new tenant, or are they gonna say, you know what, I warranty them for 1 year? Some property managers offer that, some don't, some don't. So something to consider as well.
Lots of good stories. But
what's the worst story?
When I got married, I told my wife, I go, you know what, if you want, we can live rent free for a whole year. She goes, how? I go, don't worry, I take care of it. She goes, no, I can't do that. I go, okay, we'll pay the rent. Anyway, we paid the rent. The worst story, I actually ended up in the landlord-tenant tribunal once, and if it's not handled properly, it could be a vicious fight, and it gets expensive, and people get their back up. Both landlords do and tenants do. The tribunal generally, in my experience, is kind of like it will favor tenants. I can say that quite confidently. So the best way to deal with a bad tenant is to start with a good tenant. Because once you get a bad tenant in there, then it's very difficult.
So
get a good tenant at the beginning. It's worth your due diligence, right? It's like an ounce of or a pound of work, whatever.
An ounce of prevention.
Yeah, thank you. I've lost it. But horror stories are that I've fought against tenants for months, literally in the tribunal, arguing with an adjudicator. And adjudicators are just being lenient. At the end of the day, your client's going, I'm back again, it's costing me how much money. So, as much as you can prevent it, it's not inevitable. It could happen, but you want to prevent it upfront as much as you can.
Yeah.
I've had a tenant in the basement paying rock bottom rents, which was $600 a month, and market value was at least $1,500, and we wanted to get him out, and he would not budge, and we ended up saying, look, what's it going to take? He goes, I don't know, 10 grand. And we're like, so we ended up negotiating, I think, down to 7 grand. But in the long term, it's probably a good investment to get them out. So, but this goes to show that it costs money to get them out. Rather than spending months and months fighting them, you might as well just fork over the money up front, saying, okay, get out. And what's that?
Families moving in.
Families moving, and that's a new law. That's
watch
actually,
that one now too.
People are actually being they're like watching you for that. If you rent it out within a year, you can get fined 25 grand. Mm-hmm. It might be worth it.
7 grand.
it might be worth it, but you just have to be aware of it.
Yeah.
So 2 quick stories. You asked about some of the things we've experienced. One, good property management. We had a guy who was a hoarder. The place was disgusting. I should probably see if I can find a picture, but show it to you after the fact. It was disgusting. And Andre and I have seen some pretty bad places, and I walked in, I was like, this is bad. And he's like, whatever. He walked out, and he's like, that's pretty bad. So, all we did, I told the property manager, I was like, first thing you gotta do, get rid of that guy. That's it. And then sure enough, next month, gone. I guess he just paid him out and all that. He was already, I think, 1 month behind on the rent. So, but that goes to show, I was like, wow, really? Because I've also on another one, I had a very, well, it's actually a family member that went through some difficulty with a tenant, and there wasn't property management involved, and I tried to help out as much as I could. But that one was bad because we had lots of cars and everything going, and we're pretty sure there's like drug deals happening there. They were known to the police. We went to talk to the police about it, and they're like, we're coming with you to talk. Like, so we had police escorts to go to the house. We went to the tribunal. We pretty much had videos and everything, like these are drug deals. The person who leased the house isn't even in the house. Sorry, the tenant's good. You can't get rid of him. Tribunal. I'm like, what more do you want? Like, video evidence doesn't even hold up. And that we were told by the paralegal the video evidence would, and it didn't. So ultimately, we created so much grief for them because any step at a line, we were, here's an N4, here's an N5, here's an N7, here's this, that's broken, this. 2 months, they just up and left. They didn't even tell us, but we got lucky. So we were looking in there and we were like, there's no furniture, there's nothing here. They had just gone. And as soon as we found that out, changed the locks. So that was one of the worst ones where when you have to have a police escort to go to your own house, a single family home in Toronto, it's, yeah, that sucked.
I had an experience where one of my clients, they had a grow up, and they knocked on the door, and he opens it up, and you just see a glow of light. Like, I'm talking like a and then he's like, okay, well, I need to get this guy out. And then there was a really bad dog, like a killer dog, in there that the tenant was threatening him. You know what? You come in here, and basically you're going to be in jeopardy. So eventually he came in and got escorted again with either it was either an ex-copper or undercover someone who was armed and just ready to protect him in case something was to happen. When that happened, eventually they were able to get him out. But that was one of the most interesting ones I think I've came across. Like a big glow of light. That was kind of cool to see.
Borealis in the living room. Yeah.
Did you still see the glow of light throughout the day?
Well, so I guess the take home there, property management, huge. I love the fact all I get is an email and I find out after the fact. If they know what they're doing, don't have to worry about any of these horror stories. They're great at parties and all that, but don't go through it. So, real life monopoly. How do we get started? You'd asked before, identifying the right property. Let's start off, before you go after the property, think of your ideal tenant. Who do you want to be renting to? Do you want to be renting to students, young professionals, families? That's really going to dictate the market you're looking at and the area you're looking at. So, defining the area, they both tie in together. I'm not going to be going beside a university necessarily for a family place, but student, of course. So as soon as you define that area, get a knowledgeable realtor. These guys, they know the ins and outs, they know the properties, they'll advise you. Quick story about Andre and why I think he's one of the best is early on in my career. I don't even know, I think I may have told this to you before, but yeah, we were searching for a property down, so we have a duplex that we got it down in Leslieville, but just prior to that, we'd found a similar property in Leslieville, and everything looked pretty good, numbers looked good, but he'd been searching with me for a little while, and I'm like, do I buy it, do I not? I'm right on the fence, I just have to sign, and for him, it's just a little, and I would have bought it, and he's just like, you know what? I don't think it's the right one, we'll keep looking, and you were already months invested with me, I think, at that point, in educating me, so it's one of the good ones. You guys know that, you're here, but that makes a big thing. He understands, okay, what it is you're looking for, and that'll help you pick the right investment, and that's what kept bringing me down the road. Property management, right retailers, the right people on your team makes it all easy and enjoyable, so that's huge.
Andre, why in that situation, why did you say that's not the right deal?
I paid him to say that right now. Because there was a legality, I do remember that property. I don't remember you didn't tell me the story though, like that you appreciated that, but thank you for sharing that. I do remember it. It was not a legal triplex. It was, I don't even know if it was a legal duplex, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think it was.
It
wasn't legal duplex, but it had the second unit.
It had 3 units. There was 3 units, yes.
Okay.
And then the basement was only accessible through the back, and you didn't have a legal width between the houses to be able to access it. And I said, look, if you're basing your income and your investment based on the third unit downstairs, if anyone ever complains, meaning neighbors or your own tenants, you're shut down. And then what? Is this a good investment anymore? So some people are willing to take that risk. I kind of felt that Will, although he may have maybe been willing to, I was like, no, I know we can find better. Yeah. And then that's what we did, and we did find better.
Yeah. So all these guys, I have stories about everyone. Arturo, Steven, and that's where they've proven to me they know what they're doing and they're willing to make this stuff happen. And that's why I say you've got the dream team, because they'll actually get it done. There's too much talk around here. These are people that will actually close deals. So some of the things to look for in the markets, we're looking at a net migration, or people moving in or out of an area. Pretty straightforward. If everyone's moving out, then why are you going to try and buy properties? Property prices are just going to go down. You're going to get diluted rental market, all of that. Median income, that's going to tie into who your ideal tenant is, know how much they're going to be paying, know where you're going to be sitting in terms of income. I want to know the average household income. The job market, who are the big employers, what's going on there. Crime rates, school systems, all of this stuff. So try and think of big picture and ask yourself, is this a growing city? Is this a growing town? Like, look for things. And this is where, like, we start to get into clues. When you're driving an area, searching for an area, you're looking for construction, you're looking for cranes, trailers. If I'm driving down the road, am I seeing a lot of dump trucks or those little construction vans? Hospitals, colleges, universities, those are big things that go in the paper, and lots of people take that into consideration. City upgrading its transit system, that's huge. So that'll help in terms of defining the growth of a particular area, a place that may be cut off. Now they'll have bus routes on, or subways or some kind of transit. Well, you know that area is going to grow. Street widening, that happens a lot prior to developments. You might not see anything. You might not see that little obscure sign, but you're going to notice, hey, why are they putting in a new water main? Why are they making this a 2-lane? Well, it's to accommodate future traffic. So what kind of city is it? Again, we're talking about university town, major employers. Think of some towns that are built around the GM plant. Well, what happens with the layoffs? What happens with that? Think of Fort McMurray and the oil and all of those types of things. So I think Fort McMurray was exploding a couple of years ago. People couldn't even get houses, and then decimated both oil industry and fires and things. So just know what you're getting into. Gentrification, lots of people talk about that, look about that. Like, you're driving through Toronto and you're seeing these big houses. The little bungalows get knocked down and these monster mega homes go up. So the McMansions.
I do even want to point out that I was guilty of that too. I got caught up in the Edmonton craze, and I bought one property when it was just starting, which I lucked out, but then I also bought one that was at the peak. And I still own that one because I can't sell it. And if I did, I would be losing quite a bit of money. So it is very easy for someone to dangle a carrot in front of you saying this is the next best thing, but please don't get carried away with what other people tell you. And I know we're sitting here telling you, but please, I'm also telling you to do your own due diligence and invest in something that you personally believe in, not something that someone else believes in and someone else is telling you this is the next best thing. Do it because you believe in it, and you can see yourself not only living there today, but in 5, 10, 20 years from now. If you do that, I think you can't go wrong. I invested in, I'd say, at least 5 cities, not including Toronto, that I wish I didn't invest in.
It's hard to you get caught up in the hype for sure. So look at all the factors and try and build a mental model, build a picture of what makes sense. Is there really some longevity there? Unlocking hidden finances. These are just some things to keep in mind when you're looking in terms of how am I going to come up with money to invest. So Steven's going to be talking more about that stuff, but obviously you've got cash in the bank, TFSAs. Those are great, easily accessible. Start thinking about the returns. I'm not advising you one way or another. Think of your own picture, accountants, and everything involved, all the tax implications. But if something sucks, if you own a stock, just at a certain point, you have to say, hey, I'm not happy with this. I'll do better over here. Just know what you're getting into. HELOCs, home equity, like see if you can unlock some of your finances in your primary residence. That's a big one. If you own a business, self-employed. So, all right, there's a lot to do with that. And RSPs, there are ways to do that too. This is a tricky one. It's not something that I can go into in detail now, but RSPs, yeah, you should know that there are ways that you can use those for private mortgages and things like that, but there's a whole bunch of rules involved. So,
is there a minimum amount that you think makes it worthwhile to look at pulling money out of, let's say, a self-directed RSP?
well, see, you can't just pull it out. You're going to be looking for someone who's certified to deal with those funds, because you're just
Not to pull it out, but
yeah.
essentially to set up that private mortgage to invest in.
That's where like it is a longer conversation, because you're going to have to pair up with somebody who specializes in setting up that kind of thing, because he's going to have a registered account for you to transfer in and guarantee return.
Sorry, are you talking about if you were to invest your RSPs? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, if you have cash or underperforming
Yep.
assets in your existing RSP,
Yep.
now using that cash to invest in,
As a private lender, for example, right?
yeah,
Okay. Not purchasing property, or just actually here's.
yeah, like so in that example, you needed $400,000 even from $2 million purchase.
Yep.
Yep.
If you've got, making it up, $200,000 in an RSP, so you could pull, 200 from it from there, and then another 200.
Well, normally it's the other way around. They're actually on the mortgage side. So you're going together with a bunch of people to create that 1.6 million. So instead of conventional bank financing, they're on that end. You're not going into it on the capital side. So yeah.
But I also had someone. Let's say you needed $400,000 to put into that property that we saw there, right? If you had $400,000 or $200,000 in RSPs that you wanted to lend to the purchaser, whether it's a first mortgage or second mortgage or third, you can do so, and I've seen people do it. And depending on what loan to value you're at, will determine what interest rate you will charge that person.
Yeah.
Does that answer?
Yeah.
Somewhat?
Yeah. That's why we're saying it's kind of a longer conversation.
Yeah. So in theory, if all four of us were going into an investment, you could lend your RSP funds to like our corporation or whatever that we're acquiring it through to then purchase towards the property. But you can't just pull it out without tax implication.
Are you saying if you were all in on the deal?
In general,
Because that would be like a non-arm's length.
there would be opportunities where they do it through a private placement
Right.
that permits registered funds to
Right.
invest into the acquisition of the real estate. So generally, it would be in like a general partner, limited partner structure, where the limited partner can accept registered funds, and all limited partners are acquiring an asset. So you can use your RSPs to go into that to get your share of the asset.
Would that be considered non-arm's length because you've got a financial interest in the partnership?
Technically,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's no rules around.
No, it just makes it.
Yeah.
There's more stipulations for the. Like if it's non-arm's length, you've got to qualify based on CHMC. You've got some other provisions, right? As opposed to an arm's length, which is the one you were talking about, where you're just lending to an unrelated party.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the difference, one is you lending, the other one is you investing. Because you're getting an ownership in that investment with your funds, whereas the other one you're giving.
Oh, okay.
Really
Gotcha.
different. Yeah.
Will you guys cover it later in terms of the ideal way to structure a purchase, whether it's through a corporation?
Yeah, I'll touch on that a bit.
Right.
Just generally, yeah.
Yeah, you've got the experts here, so that's why. Like, I'll throw out the ideas, the general ideas, but that's why I brought them, because there's these specifics that may even change. So I'll just be passing it along and make sure to get their information and follow up with those kind of things. So some of the current projects. So York Street in London. We did the other one, Warncliffe, but this is very similar. It's almost a mirror image. We've got 12 units instead of 13. Looks like crap, which is perfect. That's what I want. So you've seen what we were able to do in the past, and so this is the kind of thing we're going for again if we want to repeat it. This one actually performs. So like I said, I'll be sending this stuff out if you guys want it. But we're talking the purchase price at 1.3, down payment, closing costs, renos. So we're in a fair amount, 1.1 million to get it to where we want. 2.1 is where the cap rate is going to bring the value. So we've jumped it from 1.3 to 2.1. So pretty significant with 590 grand invested. So some of the monthly, so this is the new monthly income. What's nice about this one is that our previous building had 6 2-bedrooms and 6 1-bedrooms. This has 12 2-bedrooms. So we're getting the full 1,200 as opposed to 1,000. So the rents are actually similar. So it makes it very attractive. Monthly expenses, great thing is we have a very good idea of what it costs because we have one down the street. So we know the expenses, the NOI, everything involved. So like I talked, the 3 pillars in terms of the real estate. So I've broken this down and I like to generalize because it helps everyone understand, because there's a lot of what's my cash on cash, what's my ROI? Well, what are you talking about? You're talking about your equity, what is it? So we've got 3 things: the cash on cash return, so that's what's left over, the net cash flow. We've got the mortgage pay down, pretty minimal because we just started paying the property down, so it's all interest at the start. And the appreciation, so modest appreciation at 2%. So the internal rate of return, IRR, don't get too caught up on that. Kind of a complex calculation, but for simplified purposes, we're taking all that info, grouping it together. IRR is a real number about how the property is performing based on a number of factors. So the cash, the appreciation, the pay down, all of those things. So we had a couple of strategies here. So we had the buy and hold, which is basically you go in, you've got the 1.1 invested, you leave it there. 9.8 is what we're expecting to get. Now, a slightly better strategy is we're going in, same model, we're following same kind of prices, renovations, all of that. But at the end of this, we're going to be refinancing. We're going to be looking at saying, hey, the rents are now up here. With the purchase price and everything based on NOI, you refinance and try and get a lot of that money back. This is a variable number, and Stephen's able to work that stuff out or anything, but just for example purposes, that's what we're kind of going with. So we only have a net invested capital of 375. So we started off at 1.1. People are coming into this. Refinance, most people are getting a majority payout, 80% payout, roughly speaking. So there's still some money left in the deal, but you're getting most of your money back. But look at what happens to your return. You're now up at 22%. So we've almost doubled the returns just by the way we structured and refinanced. So there's a lot of tricks like that. So this is a pretty good one. It's pretty straightforward because we've done it before. So this is, I love this one, but just found out this morning, this one got snagged out from under us. So I left it in here because it literally happened this morning. I got the email. But we have a Muskoka lakefront property here, a whole bunch of properties already existing. So we had 4 cottages in the middle, some 2 larger ones. It was pretty awesome, a lot of structure, and the purchase price was right. And this is one where we touched on briefly about one of the strategies. Here's some more pictures. Nice granite.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it looked really good. It looked the part, that's for sure. It was being run as a resort. We had a couple of different strategies coming into it. So here's the interior, just needs some updating, and we had a plan for that, designer and everything. Another aerial view just to give you an idea of all the structures involved. There's actually another one even behind there. So a lot of buildings, a lot of bang for the buck. It's 2.8 million was the purchase price on that, which is very reasonable in Lake Muskoka. I'm not sure if you know, some of the cottages, just one-off cottages, are going for that price. But it's because it was a resort and it wasn't run optimally, the numbers weren't working, which drove down the price, which created an opportunity.
4 seasons?
It was actually 3 seasons. So part of what we were going to do was we were going to bring it up to a 4 season. Our first strategy was actually a condo conversion. This created some really good returns, because we were talking 2.8, and actually this is the thing that was really disappointing. It sold for 2.4. We didn't realize how eager the guys were to sell, so we didn't move quick enough. But that's another kick in the teeth. But yeah, it happens. Be prepared. You'll do all sorts of due diligence. This is the behind the scenes. You'll do this 10 times before you can actually lock down the deal.
Looking at that deal?
6 months.
So how didn't go in with that?
It got bought and fell back onto the market recently, and then when we revisited it more seriously, it got snagged up again. So they didn't have any conditions. We couldn't compete because we'd be looking at financing conditions and things, and they just came in. They recognized the opportunity and gone. Can't blame them, but. Yeah, because you see here some of the returns, right? Like we put in around 600. It was decent. We're talking cosmetic renos, total capital 1.7. The monthly income, that's based on 3 months, renting it out as a resort in the high season. So you're floating the entire property on 3 months, 9 months use to do whatever you want. So cash on cash, all that depreciation though. Here's what's huge. If you look at the condo conversion costs, so there's some closing costs and other stuff mixed in. These are just estimates. But condo conversion costs, you chop this up and you're now selling off these individual buildings. Well, now you've created $5.7 million is now the new property value, and you're only in it for a little bit. So you get 106% appreciation. So it depends too, longer window, because if you're forced, first 3 years you're looking great at 60%. You're not going to sell all these things overnight, so you have to kind of project outwards and say, what's my 5 year? I'm still looking good. As well down here, this is hold and operate as a resort. If you just bought it and ran it as is, you'd still be putting some of the money in, but you're saving on condo conversion fees and a few other costs. So you've got a little bit less, 1.3 instead of 1.7, but it was still a profitable project, which to me is our plan B. We're still okay. We get this, the market tanks, we can't sell off these units. What do? We continue it as a resort. We're still safe. We're still getting phenomenal returns. So, yeah.
You didn't assume anything on more than the 3 months?
For which part? Sorry.
The monthly income. You just assumed you're going to continue to run it.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, I try and do things on a more conservative basis. So they were at around 22, 23, but you put in, renovations of 600 grand or 420 grand, you spruce those things up, you're getting more rent. It's a much more attractive property. One of the things we were looking at is putting in a swimming pool and kind of like a communal area. So basically clubhouse, swimming pool, you're extending the season on both sides, so you'll be able to bring the rent up even more than that. But that's just based on the 3 peak seasons, yeah. So, yeah, so that's an idea. When you're looking at some of these things, it's a different way of looking at it. You're not looking at your standard multifamily. There's opportunities and all sorts of stuff. Here's another one. This is a good one we're looking at in Guelph. It's not on the market, but it's pretty attractive. We had it come up 2 years ago, and there were some problems which I believe are almost sorted out with the city. And that's why we've gone back to the table with this one. So this is 17 units. It's an old historic style building, which I personally love. I think it's awesome. You have these walls, like, yeah. And you have these crap kitchens, which to me is like perfect opportunity, right? It's great whenever you see these kind of things. So, because the exterior, so much of this is so good, and just to have that, you're so close to being able to get the top rent, and it's right smack downtown Guelph. It's your class A, you're right in the middle. So here are the numbers, 2.8 again. So this is good to see because we're looking at one versus the other. Like the other purchase price was 2.8. Here's another thing. You have the same purchase price, but how is this different? Down payment's a little less. Different type of property, different type of income. Yeah, so a little bit different there. Renovation costs are less. Total capital required are less. But the actual appreciation or after renovation value isn't as high. Monthly is all pretty good. One of the strategies we talked about before, this is one that has 1 hydrometer for 17 units. Makes no sense. We're opening up $30,000 annually in capital just by putting in the hydrometers to this property. So we're pretty straightforward.
How much are you opening up?
30 grand. Yeah, because we're now taking that expense, giving it to the tenants. So it's going to take time. That's why we said 5+ years. Because we have to wait till the turnover. You can't just drop a letter saying you're paying for hydro now. We've got to wait for the tenant to leave, and then the new tenants are now paying hydro. So some of the numbers again, the cash on cash mortgage pay down, the forced appreciation. Yep.
When you purchase these properties, do you have a condition that all the tenants are leaving or vacant?
No.
Closing? No.
You can't with commercial. You inherit the tenants. So With the smaller properties, yeah, you can group them. You can, depending on the use as well. So
I think the rule is if it's 3 units or higher, you cannot. I think or 3 units or less, you're allowed to because you're moving in. But anything higher than that, it's considered an apartment building. You can't use those reasons to.
But if you're gonna do this like major renovation, like you've got the whole place, is that like reasonable cost to?
no. Well,
Actually, I don't know for that.
yeah, I'm not 100%.
I know personal use, yes, renovation, I'm not sure.
Depends on the scenario.
So that's what you guys are essentially doing, right?
Not with this one.
No, but they bottom out. Those other scenarios, they were basically paying out the tenants to leave.
Yeah,
Not
so
just saying
You
here
have to pay each individual tenant.
yeah, you come in. How much you want to go?
And do you do
3
that
months, 6
before closing, like before like finalizing everything, or like kind of talk to each tenant?
Yeah, but, just sorry, Stephen made comment on that. I don't know that you're necessarily going to want to buy a building and have it vacated. Your bank's probably not going to want that because you're going to need cash flow. So I think that generally, if you're going to do a renovation, you're going to time it so that you still have income coming in on your property. As much as it'd be nice if, like, you want to do your house, just everybody move out and let's move back in.
Yeah.
You're not going to want to do that because your cash flow is going to suffer tremendously. And you may be outside of your mortgage covenant if you're doing that. So, but Stephen can talk more about that. In terms of the specific ways to have tenants removed, I don't know if renovation is one. Something we can look into, but I don't think that it is in and of itself.
I do know it is with a smaller residential, because you can actually ask tenants, look, I'm doing substantial renovation where it's going to be inhabitable.
Yeah.
You have to leave, and I think you have to provide at least 4 months notice for that, or maybe even more. But you have to give them the first right of refusal to come back at the same rent that you had it at before.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be able to jack up the rate. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was a catch. We looked at a 12-unit townhouse up in Barrie, and that's what ended up happening there. Is that you could get rid of them. This is what we're doing. We're going to renovate, but they're coming back at the same rent. So you're making the place beautiful. They're coming back. And it's, how long have these guys been in here? 7 years. Well, they're probably not going. So, or they're coming back knowing it's going to be nicer or something.
So is it not legal to do that?
In that case, yes, it is legal. Like in Barrie, when I talked to my property manager, he said I can do it. I can get rid of them, and that's what he would have been able to do when they come back at their previous rent. So that was legal. When we talked about Warncliffe, that's why we partnered with the builder, because he was the one able, like, he sold the property to us at 1.9, but he was totally invested at 1.3. He didn't pocket all that difference, right? He had to pay the tenants out, he had to carry the property and all that, so that shrinks his margins on the deal. Like, it might seem like a lot to some people, but when you start to do the math, that shrinks down. And it's still worthwhile for them, but it's not like, oh, big payday, right? So.
Yeah, and other investors, when it comes to larger projects, they actually try to figure, okay, how much is it going to cost me to get these tenants out, so I can do the renovation all at once. Because you can do it all at once, or you just do it 1 unit at a time, which to me it complicates things because you're mixing in great tenants with the people that have been sitting there for a long time who might not mingle very well. But they actually budget for it. They go, okay, well, what am I going to estimate that it's going to cost me to get these tenants out?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, there's always a price. There have been scenarios where someone just will refuse. They just want to stay. They don't care what you're going to pay them. And it's unfortunate, but it's not very often that we come across that. There's always a price.
Yeah, 3 to 6 months is what I've used, just for an idea. I'll say I budget 3 to 6 months. So 12 units times 6 months rent, that gives me a big thing. If I go under, great, bonus. But I'm putting in that much to actually cover booting these guys out. Like for an example, so Warncliffe or the other one on York Street in London, that's what we would be doing. We'd be getting rid of these people. In this one here in Guelph, we're doing one at a time. We're just waiting for, because there's not much work that needs to be done. We're just updating the kitchen, throwing in a couple new appliances. The big thing is the electrical, but people are going to have to deal with it as they work around. So we're doing one by one with this one. That's why we're a 5+ year strategy.
And parking was the other thing, right?
Yeah, so parking is why it went off the market, because they couldn't actually sell it as a legal 17-plex. It's such an old building, and the zoning and also the actual basically the layout and everything. They didn't have appropriate parking, and they had to sort out a lot of stuff before they could legally sell the building. So yeah, that's pretty close to being worked out. So same scenario, but this one refinance again. So we're talking 3 years. We're being more aggressive to boot people out and turn over to jack up the price so that we can benefit from the refinancing. But our cash on cash, we're refinancing to nothing. So $1,500, we're talking easily plus or minus. But all that has moved down to the forced appreciation. We have a huge forced appreciation there. So that really jumps up the returns. It's just different ways of looking at the same building. So if you want to have an understanding of all that. Art.
Yeah, just because Google's great. Just quick legal research. Sorry. A landlord can remove a tenant if the renovations are major repairs, make it unsafe for the tenant to be in the property, and during the work, and a building permit is needed. So you're not going to be able to do cosmetic changes if it's substantial. And then you have to give them a right of first refusal, and they'll have to come back. You have to give them a 120-day notice. So it's not like leave. There's a process. So that process has to be factored into the carrying cost of the building, et cetera, et cetera. So you're not going to cleanse your building of people by trying to renovate it.
Yeah, but that's if you want them to come back. So if you don't want them to come back, it's really the only option is here.
Hi guys.
Great.
Thanks, Will. So my job really is, as a lawyer in this process, is once you've got your property purchased and you've got your financing lined up, I'm the guy that sort of officially buys it for you. I transfer title. I get the money and I do all the searches, due diligence, I correspond with the other lawyer, and I register the property in the new owner's name. Now, in terms of the new owner, this is sort of the title. I've sort of talked about holding real estate with the understanding that it's sort of a group of people holding an asset together, because there's other ways to hold real estate. There's individuals, there's trusts, there's public corporations. So some of you, by your show of hands earlier, actually own investment properties. I'm just curious how you hold them. How do you hold your property?
Personal.
Personal?
Corporation.
Corporation? Personal? When you acquired your property, was there any forethought as to how you should hold your property? Was there any advice given to you on the personal side?
Yeah, my accountant basically said because I was focusing on rent to own and flipping that tends to attract back to business income, that it made sense for my situation.
Okay. So, go ahead.
I heard personal better for taxes. Obviously, you'll save a lot, but if you want to go with corporation, you just look more appealing to the other investors if you want to continue to grow.
Okay. So the long and short is, there's different ways to hold title, and there's a myriad of reasons for holding title in particular ways. It all depends on a variety of factors. For today, I've decided just to sort of touch upon, and briefly touch upon, because there's a lot of considerations, general income tax and personal liability perspectives. Tax, instead of talking about tax, always defer to a tax advisor, an accountant, to give you proper tax advice, because my situation, your situation, they're all different, and the motivations may be different, okay? So, I'm just going to start back. There's various types of legal entities. I talk about corporations just generally. We all know what the word means. Do we understand what it really means legally? So basically, a corporation is a separate legal entity, separate from its owners. Its owners are its shareholders. The corporation is actually a legal entity. It can hold property. It can borrow money. It can do stuff. It can be sued. The shareholders own the corporation through their ownership of the shares, but they don't own the property belonging to the corporation. So in your case, your corporation owns your asset, your property. You personally don't, the corporation does. You, as a shareholder, own the corporation. The liability of a shareholder is really limited to your investment in the property. So absent a personal guarantee, if I'm a shareholder, I invest $500,000 into my company to capitalize it, and it borrows money, and it buys a property. If things don't go well, my personal liability is at $500,000. Okay. So the next thing I talk about is joint venture corporations. So these are corporations that would be used a corporate vehicle would be used to buy a property where you have multiple investors. So the corporation itself, that corporation is a separate legal entity for tax purposes. It's going to get taxed. And these are just general characteristics. Some can be considered pros, some can be considered cons, advantages, disadvantages, depending on your personal circumstances. One of the nice things, from a legal perspective, is that it's easy to deal with a corporation because we're all familiar with it. So if the corporation owns a property, you have to enter into a contract with a property management company. It's easy. We know how to do that. It's commonplace. Tax treatment is. Can't even look at it. Okay, I'm behind my back. Am I even like where am I? Thanks, it's been a slice, guys. It's been a slice. I'm a lawyer. Technology and I do not get along. So basically, standing over here, tax treatment is a legal entity. There's two levels of taxation. The shareholders will realize income tax both at the corporate level and the individual level. So it's considered as a two-tier perspective. The flip side is that you have the ability to pass dividends between Canadian-controlled private corporations. So that may be advantageous for you. So that's why I said sometimes it's a disadvantage, sometimes it's an advantage, depending on your perspective. Shareholders will be governed their relationship with each other through a shareholders agreement. A shareholders agreement is a contract that governs ownership. So you and I are shareholders. We agree that this is how we will do things. This is how we'll elect a director, officer. This is how we'll borrow money. The liability of the shareholder, like I said before, is limited to that shareholder's investment. Okay, and what else? This is something interesting that we've done before, where you have a corporation that owns an asset, and the shareholders, and we want to buy it. So there's various ways you can do it. You can buy the corporation, or you can buy the shares in the corporation. When you buy the shares in the corporation, you're acquiring the asset, right? So you can avoid land transfer tax that way. That's just generally about joint venture corporations. The next big one is limited partnerships.
Hold on, that sounded pretty interesting. How do you avoid land transfer tax?
So what you'll do is if a corporation owns a property, you can just transfer title, right? Where the corporation sells the title to the new person, or that new person can buy the shares in the corporation. From land transfer taxes perspective, but from a liability perspective, when you buy a corporation, you buy all the liability that corporation may have, right? So there's a downside to that. Sometimes people want to buy corporations for reasons they want losses carried forward or whatever the case may be, okay? So that's just something else. Limited partnerships. Limited partnership is a form of a partnership. The rule is that you start with a general partnership. And a partnership is just basically two people coming together to do business. Limited partnerships are created by statute. They didn't exist at common law. And the principal feature is that the liability of each partner is limited to the amount of money or other property the partner contributes. A limited partner is basically a passive investor rather than an active participant in the operation of the limited partnership. So again, there's limited liability, which is really, really important. The trade-off for that is, I'm trying to find out where it says, is up here. In exchange for that, the partners do not participate in the day-to-day operations. So if a limited partner participates in the day-to-day, he could lose that limited liability status. One of the tax advantages for a limited partnership is that the income flows through to the individual partners, thereby avoiding the two levels of taxation. So that partner can then take that income and offset it against other income or that they may have. So if they have a loss on this side, they can use that against other income, which is really important. And that's what we talk about that there. Legal title. So the way we set these up, and actually I have a deal closing Monday where it's a partnership purchasing. A limited partnership is set up where you have a general partner, or you can't touch that over here, and limited partners. And you need that in order to make this work. The general partner will have 100% liability. The limited partners will have limited liability according to their percentage ownership. In order to mitigate against the general partner's liability, we usually give that person 1%. It'll be a corporation. It'll have 1% ownership in the general partnership. Okay. title will be taken to the property in the general partner's name. Okay, so that's how we do it. What else? The title. Again, one of the downsides, this applies for both corporations. Deductions for capital cost allowance are claimed at the top level. In this case, the partnership level. In the other case, would be at the corporate level. What else? Look at that, eh?
Would you mind sharing, Will, how you guys did yours on the most recent one?
On the last one, we did a corporation.
Yeah,
We did a
we
corporation.
just did a pretty straightforward corporation
Right.
because it was purchased basically myself. I just
Right.
bought the building. So it didn't need to be a complex structure with other partners involved. So we just set it up as a corporation
And that makes sense from your perspective.
Yeah.
I would advise anybody coming into it, like I would never hold investment property unless there's a real reason, a tax reason, whatever. You really want to think about, should I be taking this as a corporation, even if you're the sole shareholder. Really think about that. But in the case of multiple investors, you have to spend time and say, well, corporation or limited partnership, and depending on what sort of group you're getting involved in, you have to ask yourself, does it work for me or doesn't it work for me? Okay. In this case, we did it because Will was the sole shareholder. Were you not?
it was pretty straightforward.
It was pretty straightforward. And he would never do that as an individual. He would always do it as a corporation.
Would you, each property, would you have your own?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a client. Yeah, I have a client that owns multiple commercial properties, and I inherited the client. And one of the first things we realized, because we had a situation where one of our loans we had to refinance and we were late, so the bank came knocking. And what essentially it meant for my client was that if the lender decided to petition us into bankruptcy or enforce the mortgage, they had all our assets. They had everything. So now every property we buy, we set up a new vehicle, a specific vehicle for every property, be it a sixplex or a $25 million commercial plaza. You'd want to look at a specific document.
That's like, you should do that for everyone.
Generally, you have to balance the setting up and admin costs, right, of that vis-a-vis the asset that you're buying. If you're spending $300,000 on an asset, maybe you can hold three of them in one vehicle because they're small. But if you're spending anything significant, you might be advised to do separate stuff. The one thing I do want to mention, and maybe Stephen can touch upon it, there is limited liability. But the trigger that sort of kills that, if you will, is as soon as the bank says, I want a personal guarantee, right? So if you buy through a corporation, they say, well, I want a personal guarantee. You're not personally liable, right? So just be aware of that. There is a corporate structure which sets it up, and that is fine, but you want to look at your transaction as a whole and what all the parts are to it and what they really mean. So I just wanted to point that out. That's quick and dirty, guys. I don't want to get into too much detail because it gets complicated fast and the possible scenarios are huge, but were there any questions at all? That's it. I know Stephen wants to go.
One question. I'd like to know if just the down and dirty of, would you recommend incorporating or not? I know it's
versus a partnership.
Okay, let's just say
vis-a-vis an individual, I would say generally as an individual. Okay, well, you will take a step further. Everybody wants to look at their personal situation. So step back from how you should take your ownership interest. Step back and say, because in both cases, I think one of the questions that I'm looking at everybody is if you have kids and you're middle-aged and you've got assets, you're going to want to do some estate planning. So I know it's not up here, but let's take a step back. You really want to look at your personal situation and say, well, I'm going to set up an estate plan for myself and my family. And then you want to ideally integrate that into your investments. So if it's going to be a corporation, you would set up a family trust, for example. And that family trust could be the shareholder of that corporation. Or that family trust could be that limited partner, right? Now, so I'm kind of deviating a bit, but you really want to take a step back and look at it from that perspective. If you think that you're at the point of your life that makes sense. Then I would never really advise against doing something personally because it just attracts personal liability, even from a slip and fall perspective, right? There's that. Second of all, the big question will be, well, I've got my estate planning now. What vehicle do I want to own the property? Do I want it to be a corporation, or do I want it to be a limited liability partnership? That may be dictated to you by your bank, so you may not have an option, right? Which one is better? I couldn't tell you, because every situation is different. In Will's situation, it made no sense to do a limited partnership because there were other partners. He was the only one, and it was a corporation. If there's multiple investors, then you have to see, well, what do these investors really like? Do they like the ability to take the profits from this asset and just have it be able to, take it into their personal income so they can juxtapose it against other income? Or do they want to have it held in dividends, right? And just keep it there. They don't need the money, so they want to take it out so it doesn't be taxed. It's not taxed. So it depends on the group, what they decide, and say what's most beneficial for most of us. Because there's never going to be a perfect situation, and you go from there. Okay. I know it's not a perfect answer, but it's the one I'm going to give you. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Guys, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I have a question.
I'm trying to run away, and you guys.
No. I always.
I'm shy, guys.
You try to say Steven wants to go up, but
Steven, come on.
No, I just had a question because actually, you mentioned on the GP-LP structure with the general partner owning 1%, and the asset being held by the general partner.
Yeah.
How do the limited partner shareholders get protected from their investment if the general partner holds the asset?
Because when you do the actual deed, it'll say, and I was going to bring one today, the one I'm working on now, it says, in the name of the general partnership on behalf of the limited partnership.
Got it.
So there's actually a reference to the limited partnership in the deed itself.
Interesting.
So it's not necessarily, in trust, but on the, form. So the general partner, because it's an Inc., right?
Yeah.
It's going to hold title, but it's holding it on behalf of the limited partnership. And it says it on the deed, and it'll say it on the mortgage document itself.
Yeah. Okay. I worked with a company that had it the other way around, where they had the limited partner hold the asset.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
So then they buy them out after.
Okay, so there's another step after.
Yeah, they buy shares back.
Okay, yeah. But generally, the one we're doing now, it's generally, it's the GP that holds title, and then it's holding on behalf of the partnership.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I always like to start these presentations by saying, like, commercial financing, it's a very dynamic process. It's probably unlike everything you said you'll see before. And when I did my first deal with Will, I told him, I tell all of my borrowers, the lessons you learn on your first commercial application, are going to serve you a lifetime of commercial real estate investing. So I find on the first time, it's always Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong generally will happen. And, people always ask, if they see like mortgage brokers and there's certain impressions that come with us. But they always say, like, what do you do on the commercial side? Because the average mortgage broker is residentially focused. I think I saw a statistic the other day, there's about 12,000 mortgage brokers in Ontario, and less than 100 of them are commercial specialists. And then if you apply the 90-10 rule to everything, then you have a very select, small, elite group of commercial finance partners. So the thing that I love about commercial real estate and financing in particular is it's not black and white. In residential financing, it's TDS, GDS, 44%, 32%. Maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room, 1% or so, but it's very clear. Approve or decline. Commercial, I like to say there's a lot of gray, right? There's risk and there's mitigation. So things don't always appear as they seem. And working with a finance partner that knows or has experience can make the difference on closing or not closing on a deal. So I like to think of us as you wouldn't try to register your own mortgage without Arturo. You generally wouldn't search for your properties on yourselves without the realtor, Andre. And we play a critical role in the transaction. We're the financing partner. So we negotiate on your behalf. We have fiduciary duties to the lender and the borrower to represent each other fairly. But generally, because it's your first time, it's such a complex, dynamic process, having a professional on your side can save you thousands, if not more, on a transaction that you do. So this is my team. We have Vanessa and Connie. Connie's actually visiting us from China. The one thing you'll notice, the bigger the deals that you end up doing in commercial real estate, is there's more and more people who touch every deal. So you can't really realistically do one transaction by yourself and do it well. So I have two of the best. Our background is we're all former commercial banking professionals. I think there's about 40 years combined experience between all of us. We left the bank about 3 years ago, and now the beauty for us is we work with over, I think, 87 banks that we have access to, different lenders. Where clients are trying to finance transaction on their own, I think there's a certain value for everyone's time in this room, and certain having to go and do all the door knocking yourselves could end up becoming a part-time or full-time job. So that's how my team and I help out. So in terms of just commercial real estate markets, this is kind of a national average of the cap rates that Will was sort of speaking to earlier. In commercial real estate, especially on the financing, you'll notice that the lower the cap rate means the higher the value of the property, whereas the higher the cap rate means the lower of the value of the property. But as you can see, commercial real estate's been doing very well on a national level in Canada over basically its existence in time. On the multifamily side of things, this is as of Q1 2019. You'll see on the high-rise A and B, cap rates are very low, these values are going up. And on the low-rise A and B, it's still very good, less than 5%. As you guys start doing more and more of your own research and getting comfortable, this will make a lot of sense to you, but I just kind of wanted to put those numbers in there and tie everything together that you've seen before. So from a financing perspective, the difference between commercial real estate and residential real estate. So if you walk into your bank and you're looking at buying a multifamily property, if it's 5 units or more, it's generally classified by most lenders as commercial real estate. They come low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise, and they can even be side-by-side. So if you have 5 properties or more side-by-side in a row, you can actually classify it as commercial financing, regardless of its class, if it's a single-family, duplex, or triplex. If you've got 5 of them side-by-side, the pins merge, and you can actually acquire it on it commercially. So with commercial real estate, we tend to, especially multifamilies, we tend to classify properties. Again, there's no hard and fast rule. I may look at classes one way. Most people will say there are 3 classes. From the financing side, we generally say there are 5. It's almost like an alphabetical school grading system, A, B, C, and D. So generally, Class A's are the newest and best of the best city centers, less than 10 years old building, really good shape. That's what we'd consider a Class A. Most of us on our first commercial real estate are not buying this. Class B is generally the next step down from a Class A, more than 10 years old, well-maintained, good location, but just because it's 15 or 20 years old, it's still considered a Class B. From a Class C perspective, generally not a great property, not a terrible property. I like to think of it as the cosmetic makeup type of property where it's structurally sound, it's in a good location. You can add a lot of value by investing in cosmetic items. And it's generally 20 to 50 years old, needs, like the properties that we're demonstrating, significant capital investments. 500,000 is pretty significant, even as little as 100, depending on what you're purchasing for. Could seem significant, and these are what we consider a Class C. And then Class D and E are properties that are much older, not well located, needs a lot of improvement. But even if you dumped all the money in the world into them, because of location or certain characteristics with that property, it could never become a Class C or Class B. So Class E properties, Class D properties are extremely difficult to finance. There are ways to do them, but they're not conventional. It's probably not something you'd want to be doing on your first type of deal. But I think definitely there's a place in the marketplace for Class D and Class E. Just some tips on financing, just kind of give you guys a high-level overview. 5 doors or more, single-family properties can be considered multifamily. Class C or better generally preferred or easier to finance. There is insured financing available, similar to what you do on the residential side. You can get CMHC insurance on commercial real estate and get very attractive financing rates. One of the biggest differences you'll notice is, especially if you've been borrowing residentially for a long time, I think we had 35-year amortizations on the residential side. We've seen 30. In commercial real estate, generally it's 25 or less, unless you're doing it with CMHC insurance, at which point you can get potentially up to 40 years. Generally, only Class A properties get the 40-year AM, but I financed many Class B and Class C properties at 30 or 35 years using CMHC. I think we did on your deal as well.
Yeah, so the example you saw for Warncliffe, we CMHC insured that property, so you pay per door, and they do some kind of inspection or whatever it is, but it was Class A and all of that, which allowed us to get 35 years on the building, which really helps the bottom line. You get way better cash flow when you can do that. So
yeah, as you get more experience, you can get as high as 85% loan to value on commercial real estate. Generally, it's at 75. The one thing I like to preface is every sort of lender has a target loan to value that they like to lend on a commercial property. For multifamily, most lenders are at 75 as their target. But if you notice, I said target, not actual, meaning properties can only achieve financing based on the cash flow in place. So if the cash flow can't support 75, you'll never get 75 loan to value. If it can only support 60, it can only support 70, whatever it supports is what you can get. So generally, as clients are searching for properties, one of the biggest values that we add and why we have a team is that before you make an offer with Andre or whoever your commercial realtor is, we'll actually do an income analysis on that property so you know what your financing expectations can be going into that offer. I see a lot of the times clients that come to me, we made an offer, can you get me 75% loan to value? And I'm like, no, the property cash flow only supports 50. So just having an understanding of what's achievable, and they usually say, like, why? My numbers show it can. I'm like, well, what amortization did you use? 30 years. What down payment did you use? 20%. There's a big difference in commercial and residential real estate, so just having that understanding up front can go a long way. The great thing here is most people in this room are probably going to be buying multifamily. I finance all types of commercial real estate, but from a financing perspective, multifamily properties are considered the lowest risk by most lenders. So it's very desirable to be financed. So in the commercial real estate world, there's a variety of lenders that you'll end up working with, depending on the property's class, location, your own situation, your corporate structure, size, so many variables. You could potentially work with any one of these types of lenders. I'd say banks do a very good job on multifamily real estate. Credit unions, non-bank lenders, insurance companies, pension funds. Each one of these companies will have their own appetite for specific deals. So you'll find that there's no one size fits all on any one property. You can go to 5 different lenders and get 5 different options. And as a consumer, especially starting out on your first property, just understanding all the keys, terms, conditions, structures, and what's available is key. So definitely lots of options and something that we specialize in. So I'm going to walk you through a hypothetical commercial financing application because it is quite lengthy. One of the other things we see a lot of is we sign an offer for financing, we have 15 days condition of finance or a 30-day closing. That is probably one of my worst nightmares as a commercial lender, that often when we get these kinds of deals, depending on our capacity or just all the moving parts, we might turn that deal away just because we know it's very unlikely that transaction gets financed, or it's going to be extremely high stress for every single person involved. So we strongly believe in path of least resistance. We try to manage expectations and have a very successful closing for everyone. But as I walk through this example, you'll understand why. I'd say on average a commercial transaction takes 60 days. We've done deals in 30 days, we've done deals in 2 days. But again, it was very stressful and painful for everyone involved. So as you guys are working with your realtor and searching for a commercial property, that's sort of like the beginning steps. Once you find that property you want to purchase potentially, that's when your due diligence period begins. in commercial real estate, it's extremely important to do your due diligence, not just listening to me or Will or Arturo, but just doing your own due diligence and making sure like it still makes sense to me on some kind of level, right? Once you get past that and you're like, I want to go further, there's actually going to be some cost, due diligence costs that I think a lot of people are not prepared for. So on average, you'll have to get an appraisal at some point. I always recommend do as much of your own research as you can. Check those market cap rates, ask your realtor for comps. Just understand that before I spend $2,500, $3,000 on an appraisal, this is something I want to go forward with because my lender's going to need it if I'm going to put in this offer. So just keeping that in the back of your mind. An appraisal on average can take 2 to 4 weeks, depending on location. I had someone tell me today it's going to take them 30 days to turn on an appraisal in Sudbury. That's on the extreme side. In Toronto, generally 10 days. But there is seasonality to this industry and a shortage of appraisers. So things can take long at times. So just having that buffer period in your offer is key for your due diligence. Depending on the historical use or neighborhood of that property or neighboring properties, you could be required to do a phase 1 environmental report. That in itself could be another $2,000 to $3,000 that you're going to have to pay for. So the mortgage agent doesn't pay for it, the lender doesn't pay for it. It's your own due diligence cost. So I think right now we're at about $5,000 to $7,000. Depending on the results of that phase 1, there could be a recommendation by the environmental consultant for a phase 2 environmental report. That in itself could be anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 depending on the size or more. And in an extreme case example, there could be remediation required, and the sky's the limit on what you have to do. At that point, most people walk away unless you're a developer and you're like, I'm going to dig this ground up anyways. But at that point, you're pretty deep in the due diligence, even if you stop at the phase 2. Once you're satisfied with the due diligence reports, you have to do some due diligence on the numbers, verifying the leases, verifying the expenses, making sure that you're getting this nice seller's package from a realtor, from the selling realtor, and you want to make sure that these are real numbers and someone can just hypothetically put this down, because I see it all the time, especially with like a little financing example at 80% in 35 years. So just making sure that the numbers they're presenting and what they can back it up, right? With leases, even if they're expired, with utility bills, I usually ask for 12 months of utility statements, insurance statements, property management contracts if it's available, and someone somewhere has to digest all of this information, right? And then make a lending decision. So once you're satisfied with the due diligence, you then go to your bank or your mortgage partner, like myself. One of the biggest values that we do is because we're former lenders and bankers, we will actually do our own due diligence on the figures and the package and the numbers. We'll come up with our own financing analysis and explain, like, based on the figures we're seeing here, this is what you can expect. These are what we can get you in the marketplace. Does this work for you to acquire this property? And then once you decide to work with us or the bank, they're going to do the same due diligence on it. So between yourself, your realtor, your finance partner, and your lender, it's a lot of due diligence that happens, and everyone needs their time to do it. We will never work on a rush. You should never buy a property in a rush. The bank will never lend you money in a rush. So just managing everyone's expectations in the process will go a long way to making a good buying decision. Once your bank or lender decides that they're willing to finance you, this process in itself takes the average person, I'd say 3 to 5 days. Could be more, could be less, just depending on your ability to negotiate and readiness for that process. The lender will issue what they call a discussion paper, which is their best guess as to what they would be prepared to offer for financing, subject to further due diligence. That in itself, a lot of first-time borrowers think is a commitment. There's actually huge disclaimers on that document that says this is not a commitment, it's just an expression of interest, and your whole application is subject to further due diligence. So let's agree to terms and we can proceed further. At that point, the lender will ask you for an application fee, which is very unusual if you're dealing with a bank or a credit union, but that's how commercial financing works. There's a lot of people involved to do the work, and there are costs for doing that work. So the lender will ask you for a deposit for an application fee. It's refundable if they can't provide you financing, but if they provide you financing, then you don't take their deal, they're gonna keep it. So that's what that document states, and they give you indicative terms. Once you Pardon?
How much is that fee?
On average, I'd say it's about 50 basis points, so 0.5%. So if you're borrowing $1 million, it could be $5,000. It could, some lenders like credit unions will charge you 1%, some lenders charge more, 1.5%, right? Just depends on their cost. And you can always see it as low as, 25 basis points, 10 basis points. One thing I like to say is everything in this part is a negotiation. So that's where you need to negotiate. So if your appraiser quotes you 4,000, you quote him back 3, right? So you don't just sign things in commercial financing. So once you sign though, then people expect you to follow through and you expect them to follow through. So that's where that discussion paper stage is critical in getting the financing terms and conditions that you want and you need. Once everyone's in agreement, you cut a check to the lender, they start the formal application. Then this is the lender doing all of the data entry and letting their computer tell them what they think about the deal. It will generate a what we call a risk rating, which says that based on the property type, the loan to value, key financial ratios, borrower experience, we call it a qualitative and quantitative risk analysis. And based on that risk analysis, it will generate a risk rating and an approval or a decline. Assuming that you're successful and you get your approval, then the lender will come back with a commitment letter, and generally there are conditions that need to be fulfilled. Security needs to be registered, conditions need to be fulfilled, additional documentation. At this point, the lender may come back and say, we actually want some more due diligence done on the property. We actually want a building condition assessment done. We want an asbestos survey. We want a roofing survey because we're unsure of the condition.
Fire marshal certificate.
Fire marshal certificate. So all kinds of additional costs can come in because this is the lender actually doing their full due diligence through a formal application. So having the ability or the team to help you do all of that up front would reduce all the surprise and hoops and dark alleys that happen in commercial financing.
And then if I could just sort of add something, this is, from my perspective, this is where I'm usually brought in. It's a commitment letter is there, and the client says, and I have a vivid email, they just said, take a look at this, what do you think? And that's kind of what it looks like. So then we look at it as lawyers and say, okay, there's the lending terms, which we really can't comment on, the rate, that's sort of his job, but so there's security, conditions attached to the commitment, can we actually satisfy these? What does it mean if we agree to this sort of security or this? And that big, oh look, there's an unlimited guarantee, or there's cross-collateralization on other properties. So that's really, if you haven't brought me in to look at your leases or the due diligence side or anything else up to that point, you want to do that with the commitment letter because that's really where there's a little bit of value at. Say, well, let's look at this as a group and say, okay, you know what, these are the elements we're worried about. Generally, you know more than I do how negotiable those documents are.
Yeah.
If they're not very negotiable, it's just sometimes just about the borrower understanding what they're getting into.
For sure.
So that when I get the closing documents or the mortgage documents, I'll sign here. Like, oh, well, what do you mean? I signed this? Yeah, look, it said you have to sign it over there, right?
I have clients, when I give them the discussion paper, say my lawyer needs to look at it before. Because it can be 7 pages. And it's just an offer for financing that the bank has a complete right to walk away from at any time. It's not legally binding, but even at the discussion paper phase, it's not a bad idea to have your lawyer look at it. From our perspective, we generally know what is negotiable and what's not negotiable. But having an experienced partner just understanding those terms, we do that as part of our jobs as well. But it's not a bad idea. You know what? Lawyers are always the last ones to get the call. But I always say 95% of problems can be eliminated if we call them first. So that's just my philosophy.
And we didn't usually charge for the first call.
So once we get our commitment letter, there's conditions to fulfill. We instruct the lawyers and we start fulfilling conditions. Even at this point, your deal is not 100%, because one of those conditions could be additional due diligence. It could be not achievable. It could be anything. And I always like to say, like, deals die along every step of this way in commercial financing. Unfortunately, financing is one of the biggest reasons that deals fall apart, just because it wasn't obtainable. So it's a very dynamic process. Assuming that we can fulfill all the conditions, then we go to funding over to Arturo, and there's still a lot of things that can happen. I think on our deal that I did with Will, there were open permits on the building. Yeah. We actually happened to check that before we got to that stage, but even then it was still a work in progress closing off. And then we client fund, we close the deal, bank advances the mortgage, and we get the keys. So that process itself I've seen take as little as 2 days. It's happened on average, I'd say 45 on my team. And I've seen it go as long as 6 to 8 months on different transactions, just because of things on the deal.
Zoning.
Yeah, zoning, open permits, conditions, reports. So common challenges that I see is down payment. People just not understanding how much was going to be required up front before they made an offer. I actually had a client recently get into a competitive situation, and I said, where was your realtor? But they bought a commercial building. It's actually a garage on a major street, very unique type of property with no conditions. And I've been begging him to come in and do a pre-positioning. So we'll always just try to understand what they can afford. It was an owner-occupied real estate deal, so we can do that there. But now he's in a situation where he's bought a building with not nearly enough down payment that he needs, and we're going to have to find a creative solution for him. Due diligence, obviously, so much can happen. So not doing sufficient due diligence and then finding a cracked foundation afterwards could be a result. Now, one thing I like to say on due diligence, so a lot of times, like, lenders request due diligence, and I always tell clients, like, it's not a bad thing. Like, it helps you to do this due diligence because, you could be inheriting a significant problem. So if the lender is saying do a building condition report, you're literally having a professional engineer come in and check your building out, and they can find like all kinds of things, like lead plumbing, knob and tube, major issues that could save you lots of money down the line. So just getting the proper due diligence done is always key. Location creates challenges. Smaller towns, smaller markets, tertiary markets, high crime neighborhoods. All of these things are very important in a lending decision. It's not just about cash flow and recourse. There's a lot more that goes into commercial real estate financing and make a difference on your deal. Property condition is always a huge one. Class D, Class E properties. Lenders actually will say, like, this is not a fit for our book. We won't finance this property. It's too much of a headache if we have to take it over and liquidate it in the marketplace. And then funding is always a tricky one as well. So some best practices that I've seen, like, we've done quite a lot of commercial real estate, but where we find the most successful investors are the ones who tend to have these kind of 3 things in common. So developing a business model, I think Will made it pretty obvious. Like, he's got his style for his kitchens, and he's got his designer, and he's got his team. That's his business model. That's how he operates. He's gonna buy something that doesn't look great, structurally sound, and he's gonna make money where he can by turning over those units and leveraging his team and making sure that, that's his style. Some clients I know only buy Class D properties. They close a private financing, they completely gut it top to bottom. Now it's a Class C, that's their model, right? They just want to do that. Some clients buy Class C, they put as little as possible in, they actively turn units and improve NOI month over month, and they're never gonna have a Class B. So just figure out kind of what type of investor you wanna be, what's your style, and then that will help things stay consistent with less surprises. Preparing a financing package, just, little things like having your notice of assessment, having your minute books up to date, just having, when your bank or your finance partner says, I need the package, just being like, send. That's where you want to get to, not like scrambling and looking and I can't get this and I can't that, because we need every document we ask for. We don't read, 100-page appraisals for fun. It's important stuff. And then just work with professionals that specialize in commercial real estate. I know a lot of residential clients use residential lawyers for closings. It ends up costing more money. I see people use residential realtors. They just don't have enough skills or terms or conditions in the offers. Like the process just isn't as smooth. So just working with people who specialize in what you do or what you're hoping to do can make a big difference on your next application.
I just had a comment, if I could, just sort of what you're saying is, behind the scenes, behind the scenes, we all work together. Like, if he's drafting an offer, agents will call us all the time. So I'm drafting an offer, it's just, here's the situation, what do you think, right? Or something's happening. So there is always a sort of relationship between all of us in terms of how we work for the client, right? We all have a common goal, which is the client, but even behind the scenes, we're working together to help facilitate the transaction, be it the actual purchase, the financing, the refinancing, whatever the case may be. So just sort of put it out there. There's stuff you don't see behind the scenes. It's like when you go to a restaurant, you know how the food gets there. There's a whole team working behind, and we naturally have to rely on each other to get the job done. Like, I would call mortgage workers up all the time. So my client wants to like, is this even possible? Right? Tell me, educate me. We educate each other a lot of the times in terms of what we're doing.
Yeah.
So, just want to sort of put that out there.
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing. Like, right from the start, I said like the team, because there's every person involved here. I don't know all this stuff. I couldn't do all this stuff. I'm leaning on these guys. I'm saying, hey, can I do this? Can we do it? And then they start a negotiation, just like you said, amongst each other to make it happen. I'm just saying, here's the end game. Here's what I see. Let's figure it out. And then the team is what makes it happen. This is a team sport. It's not not one person is making this happen on their own. So.
Yeah, I mean, having a team's important, but if you can have your team in sync, it would be even better.
Yeah.
Like I would call Andre and say, I need all of the rental expenses and income. And then on the other side, once I'm sending the commitment letter to Arturo saying, hey, this is coming, can you start your searches? Because the bank took really long or the lender took really long and we have a very short window to close. So just making those little phone calls make a world of difference versus me going to Will, saying, Will, call your realtor, and then send this to your lawyer. Just having us in sync, just direct communication can make the world's difference in on a transaction. That's it.
If no one got cut off, no, I just put the contact information there so you guys have it. I'm sure you can ask for business cards and all that, but just so if you need anything, you can get in touch with anyone right there.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah. If you can comment on, generally, what's the market for the multifamily? Like, my sense as a non-realtor is, well, you've got such a great housing market that so many people are priced out. And this may just be sort of, rhetoric you hear. So many people are priced out of the market from an acquisition side and they're forced to rent. What's the impact of our residential sort of market in the GTA? What effect does it have on this type of product?
It actually has a pretty big impact because when people, especially when you want to buy an investment property, and you want to buy the singles and doubles and triples, and they're not feasible, they don't make financial sense anymore, people will actually start to gravitate towards the multifamily because they realize that although what you just said right now sounds pretty complex and pretty long, stretched out, but it is actually sometimes easier to finance a commercial deal.
100%. That's why I do commercial real estate.
Versus residential.
Yeah. 100%.
So this is why I actually put this workshop together, because it is the natural progression, like you said, Will. When people are sort of capped out with the duplexes, triplexes, it doesn't make financial sense anymore, or you're doing just as much work to create a triplex as you would be to create a 10plex. It is actually worth considering. And to answer your question, there are deals out there for commercial. There are obviously far and few between compared to residential, but a lot of these stuff do come about through word of mouth. They're exclusive. They're not
the market.
They're just not necessarily on the market. So having the contacts is important. Understanding the questions to ask, understanding what Stephen requires, So this is something that I do want to mention. I don't think it was mentioned. Is that you needed to find a specific purpose-built building in order for you to be able to finance it.
Yeah, there's it's a lot easier to finance the purpose-built stuff than it is to get that.
For CMHC financing.
Yes,
They want
which is what we needed and wanted because it was a lot more attractive.
Yeah, I think we did 35 or 30 year.
I think it's 35.
Yeah.
So we got a long term on that one.
And how much percentage did you have to put down?
Down payment for that?
21%?
20%.
Yeah, 20.
Yeah, it was a weird number. It's like 21% or something.
Yeah,
But
because the builder completely rebuilt that building. It was Class A at that point.
it was considered new.
Yeah.
There's nothing left.
But even in that situation, they wouldn't give us the full 40 because the structure had been there, but it was still considered new. So they met us halfway at 35, which was awesome.
Yeah. So overall, it's trying to find out what type of building you need to look for. Ideally, if you got one of the first examples you gave in what we're sort of working on, the York Street in London, that requires renovations.
Yep.
It is purpose built, so that's good, but it's not Class A.
Yeah.
Right.
That's Class C because it's not a bad area. It's actually close to some really good things, close to a hospital on a major street. So it's in a good spot.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, definitely Class C.
So it's recommended to, because there's always going to be different types of properties you can buy. You should find out, one, what you want to invest in, and two, can you invest in it? Because if a quick conversation with Steve might say, sorry, you just can't go to this class, or you can't focus on this type of building because your qualifications are not going to meet it. Yeah. So, okay, well then you don't want to accept a no for an answer. So, Stephen, what can we do, or what do we need to do in order to qualify for this?
I actually see this quite a bit. So, with the residential real estate, like mortgage rules being what they are, the government has basically made the lenders apply a rental offset. So, rather than using 100% of the rental income to qualify for your mortgage, they're using a percentage, whether it's 50% or 80%. If you're making a salary or you're self-employed, you only have so much income to service that debt, and now they're using half the income but all of the expenses. So I get a lot of residential clients saying, listen, I can't even get I own one investment property, 2 or 3, and I can't even get a mortgage for my house. I can't get a mortgage on another investment property. I've been on the sidelines for like a year or for 2 years because I can't qualify for a residential mortgage. And I find with that client, I'm able to do a cash flowing commercial property a lot easier than a residential mortgage, just because the rules are different. It's a different ballgame.
Yeah, and then there's also pooling of resources, right?
Yeah.
Where you have multiple investors and looking at an asset, whereas maybe in your example, the person couldn't buy one because they didn't qualify, but you put 10, 15 people together, then a $2, $3, $4 million property is approachable.
For sure.
So can you talk about that? Like, so let's just say we want a $5 million 25-plex, and I'm one person. I can only qualify for. I only have $250,000.
Yeah.
So how do we get 4 people together and make this happen? From a legal and from a financing perspective.
Can I go first? Yeah, because I want to just say, so I see this a lot more common today, because what's been happening is, because there's so many people shifting into commercial investing, those 5-plexes, those 10-plexes, they're like the hottest asset. Mm-hmm. So the cap rates, especially in Toronto, are in the 2 and 3%, that it requires a much larger down payment than if it were trading at normalized market values. So after an individual investor tries to buy these things that are affordable, they realize this market's too hot, and by the time the property sells, the down payment becomes so great that how do I get in? So I always say, like, buy up, right? Because it's kind of like the residential real estate. Anyone buying $500,000, the entire market could buy a house for that of qualified buyers. But a $5 million house, there's 1% of buyers in Toronto who buy that. Mm-hmm. So when people now go up to like the 20 units or more, there's less competition, where it's too small for the REITs and the MICs and the larger players, but too big for the smaller guys. So that mid-market space is sort of where people tend to get really great deals off market. But when you come to there, now you need to put 20 or 30% down on a $3 million deal, then it becomes a bit of a challenge to obtain. So then I see 2 or 3 investors, or 5 or 6 or 15, pool their resources together, and then They say, how do we do that? And I say, go see Ontario,
Yeah.
create a
And then
shareholder
it's
agreement.
it's either the limited partnership or it's a corporation.
Exactly.
So we would sit down with them and try to structure one of the two and look at the partners and figure out the best way to do that. But the whole sort of underlying principle is that there are the vehicles to do the multiple investor sort of acquisitions and it may be something to consider in terms of making an investment. You know, getting into the game in some shape or form with a good cap or good ROI versus having your money in the bank it makes sense too.
Sure, and then having that team like a property manager is even more critical because there's someone looking out for all of your collective investments, whether it's 2 or 3 or 10 or 15.
It's even a requirement in some cases.
Yeah, so some of the lender requirements will make it,
Exactly.
And that's what we found is just there seems to be that nice little niche, right? It's just a little bit above what your average person can do, but it's below the institutional investors. And that's why actually RealBond came about, is that we had friends, family, just people in general asking, saying, look, I've got this much money, I want to do something with it. So we put it together so we can start making this possible, getting in on some of these deals that are quite lucrative. Like we're seeing 20% and it's fairly commonplace. And that's why I was saying like Warren Buffett's, like people are preaching his returns, but that's kind of the norm in that area because you have to find a way to put all those resources together, structure it, and do it. And so, yeah, it's a hot market right now for that.
Sure.
Yeah.
You guys have any questions? Yeah.
Is there much appetite, depending on the scenario, for second position VTBs to go above that LTV that they're willing to lend at?
It's a great question. Comes up common with investors. So I'd say when we're doing CMHC financing, because basically the mortgage insurer will provide a insurance to that property for the life of the mortgage, CMHC assigns their own specific value to that property, not the fair market value. It's their valuation of it based on the cap rates on the deals that they're financing. But CMHC will allow secondary mortgages up to a maximum of 100% of their value because that's insured, right? So I'll give you an example. Multifamily property, appraiser goes out there, says it's worth $1 million. CMHC goes in there, they do their inspection. Usually it's about 25% below the market. So they'll say it's 75% of that, 750,000. So they will issue an insurance certificate up to 750,000, at which the lender will lend against that insured value. CMHC, so if the lender lends at 75 of 750, it's 500,000. CMHC will allow a VTB up to the 750 on that property, no more. But secondary financing is allowed on a CMH deal. On a bank deal, if the VTB is not fully postponed to the bank, meaning I'm in second position, I give up all of my rights as a second mortgage holder, the bank will treat that as debt and factor interest payments or principal payments into the overall servicing of that property, at which point, generally, it doesn't service. Like you've lost all the benefits because now the bank's going to lower their loan amount.
That's why we often see the commitment letters, no secondary financing allowed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not just them.
Even after the fact, they won't allow it after the fact.
No, they can't do it after the fact.
It's a breach of covenant.
Yeah,
It
it's
will
okay.
call your
Without
loan.
written consent from the lender.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Which you're not going to get probably.
No, right? So I have done deals with banks in second position.
Right.
Generally, the VTB holder needs to postpone all of their mortgage payments, so they accrue it as interest and payable by a balloon payment at the end of the term. It's generally the only way that.
But then you need a very favorable vendor then, like somebody who doesn't need the cash.
No one does it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a very unique situation.
The person who did it, his aunt sold him the property.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so
Right?
yeah.
So she was willing to do that,
Yeah.
but that's generally the only way. They want their money up front. Yeah.
So then how would you do it if someone was to lend you money for that $250,000? Like you don't have $250,000 yourself, but you wanted to borrow it.
From who?
From mom, from a joint venture partner, from someone who's willing to lend it to you privately.
Yeah.
But they want to register it for security.
Yeah.
They can't.
No.
There's a camera roll.
I know. No, it's true. Like, you know,
That's what gets out
No, it's not okay.
okay, no problem.
This is actually a very hot topic, right? So generally,
You want the camera up?
no, absolutely. So generally, if someone were lending you money, like the whole thing with commercial real estate is just it's due diligence, right? So we need to understand what is the source of those funds, right? We need to understand, like full disclosure, if it makes sense, we can generally make it happen. But if it doesn't make sense, then it's probably not going to fly. So if someone's giving you the money, but they don't want to disclose who they are, and they want to just like hide in the background and have another side agreement, then that won't happen for financing. But if someone makes like I'm giving this person the money, these are the terms and conditions, whether it's no terms, there's payments and whatever, if it makes sense, then we can probably fit it into the deal. And that's the beauty of commercial financing, is that it's great. We can disclose and we can mitigate. My mom's giving me the money, she doesn't want it back. Okay, that makes sense. Our partner's lending me the money, but interest payments are deferred till the end of the term. That makes sense. This guy's giving me the money, he has to charge me this thing. I'm going to give him preferred shares or Class C shares of my corporation, so he's a different type of shareholder, and it's all full disclosure, right? But the whole residential, oh, someone gave me the money and I can't tell you where it's from, it just doesn't work.
And also adding a secondary charge after closing, when the lenders do an annual review on an annual basis, can put you in a position where even if you try to do it after you closed with the bank, you could put yourself in a position where you breach during your annual review and potentially get your loan called. So keep in mind that that commitment letter is very specific. When it states no secondary financing without consent of the bank, you need consent of the bank. Because when they do a property search at your annual review and they find that lien on your property, you are officially in breach of your covenant. And that is a serious thing. So just be mindful of that as well.
Well, then you're gonna call him up to refinance me.
Assuming you have a family and it cash flows.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, you want to close this off?
Yeah,
Okay.
so again, I brought this workshop together because it's the smaller deals are getting harder and harder to find. They're not impossible. They're way easier to create. So when you come and you want to create a triplex from scratch, those still work and work very well. But not everyone has the money to do that. And if they do have the money, they're thinking maybe it's worth doing something larger. And I'm creating this workshop because there are options and they work really well as well. So to find them in Toronto is one thing, to find them outside of Toronto is another. Different markets for apartment buildings and multifamily are quite different when you start getting outside of the GTA. But there's really cool strategies, really cool properties that you can come across, as Will showed you a few that he's working on right now. And the more and more we look at them, the more and more attractive and exciting it gets. So I hope this was, we were able to give you some sort of insight as to multifamily investing and what the opportunities there are out there. If you do want to see the slides again, we will send them out with this video. You guys will get first cracks at that when it's ready. And if you ever want to touch base with any of these guys, they're an open book. They're also willing to share any experiences they have. And yeah, if you guys have anything else to say, I hope you guys enjoyed it. And until the next one, which will my next workshop will be a tour, and that will happen on, I think it's a Saturday, June 8th. I think that's a Saturday. So that's when I'm doing a tour. It will be in the Beaches, Lesaville, East York area. And I did one last year, and it was a great turnout. So now I'm looking for ways to have everyone in one vehicle versus 5 different vehicles following each other. So that will be in my next one. Stay tuned for that. And again, guys, if you have any questions, we're here. Ask away. And if not, thank you so much for showing up. I really appreciate it. And thanks for your participation as well. That helps everyone learn. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.